So there's this guy in the Old Testament, right? Got a funny name called Mephibosheth, bit of a mouthful. But this is a story about this guy who, it reveals that God can use broken things, that God himself can actually use weakness in your life just to proclaim who he is and to work in such power in your life. We find this guy in Mephibosheth. It's a story in 2 Samuel. You'll know King David, right? He comes to power after the other king Saul dies. And King David is well known as this type of Jesus. And what happens is David becomes this mighty king. He's conquering Israel, making them successful. David knows God in such an amazing way. But what happens in the book of 2 Samuel is the story pauses and David's conquering, destroying armies, and he says, is there anybody else left in Saul's family? Now, David asks this question because he made an agreement with his best friend Jonathan, who was Saul's son, before David had to run away, before he was king, that he would show kindness and friendship to Saul and Jonathan's family. And he asks this question, is there anybody left in the house of Saul? Because he was best friends with Jonathan and he loved that family. The person who was left in that family was Mephibosheth. Now, Mephibosheth the thing about him was he was disabled. He was lame in both feet, couldn't walk at all. Now, David sends for him, and what happens is he says, I'm at your service, David. And David says, don't be afraid, for I will surely show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. Because David loved Jonathan, he loved the family, and he says, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. And Mephibosheth, he couldn't believe it. He says, what am I? Who am I, your servant, that you should notice a dead dog like me? That's what he thought about himself. He thought he was worthless because he couldn't walk. He had nothing to offer David at all. But what did David promise? He said that he will always eat at David's table. Mephibosheth would always be welcome. He would always eat at the table. This incredible story, you got to think, well, what is this about? Why is this happening in the middle of David being a great king? Why is this story put in the middle of it? It's a picture of Jesus being like David and Mephibosheth being like you and I. You belong to the family of God. And despite sometimes that we've been broken, when we've maybe not done things the way we should before we know Jesus, he saves you and he promises, this is what Jesus promises you, that you'll always be welcome at his table. Like David, God promises to look after you forever. Jesus is your king and he will look after you. I want to encourage you, your future is completely secure with him. God has plans for you in the same way he had plans for Mephibosheth. He was remembered forever, despite having nothing to offer David. He couldn't walk, he couldn't give him anything, he couldn't be a warrior for him, he couldn't go and claim land for him. But yet David said, you'll be blessed forever. David was this great king, but he still remembered and blessed the little guy, the Mephibosheth who had nothing to give him. Have you ever felt with God, I've nothing to give you, God? I'm just little old me where I'm at in my life right now. If you ever feel like that, God says to you that he, like David, blesses you, he loves you, and you will always find your place in him. This story about Mephibosheth is that it's a story that God has not forgotten you. No matter where you're at in your life, no matter where you think about things, how you think about things, no matter what things look like in whether it be school or whether it be in friendships, whether it be in your family, God has not forgotten you. And that is the story of Mephibosheth. David remembering him and God saying, like David, I remember you. Even if you're broken, even if you don't think you're worthy, even if you don't have confidence, I will not forget you. There's a verse in Isaiah 49:15. It says, can a mother forget the baby that she's raised? Can she not have any compassion on a child that she's raised? But it says, even if a mother forgets, God says, I will not forget you. Where do you find yourself today? Do you sometimes think God's forgotten you? What's my life going to become? Like Mephibosheth, no matter, even if you don't have anything to offer God or you feel like you don't, God says you're welcome in the family, blessed, always ready to eat at the table with God himself. And this is the story of Mephibosheth.